Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us again. Before we start our third lecture in this series, the Midday Talks, I would like to acknowledge that the land that we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. This land is also now home to many other diverse First Nation peoples. All settlers, including recent arrivals, such as myself, have a responsibility to consider what it means to acknowledge the history and the legacy of colonialism in this and other lands. We're very excited today to have Andrew Batay-Csorba join us to show us the work of Batay-Csorba architects. This studio, the studio that we're about to see today, is established by Jody, who's unfortunately not with us today, and Andrew Batay-Csorba. It started 10 years ago, first in LA and now in Toronto, inventing new spatial experiences through investigations on site, typology, materiality, and movement. Their work of late is very much an exploration of the Toronto context, and through both research and practice, which is a rare combination, the studio uses every opportunity to make a contribution to the larger discussions on the spatial development of this city. Previous to founding Batay-Csorba, Jody and Andrew have designed, directed, and managed some 96 projects in 38 cities in 11 countries, both on their own and with Gary partners, this is Jody, and Morphosis, and this is Andrew's, where they previously worked. The studio has been widely published, exhibited, and the recipient of many, many awards. So I'll just name a few, including the 2017 RAIC Young Architect Award, named by Azure magazine as one of 30 Canadian architecture firms breaking new ground, the 2015 Canadian Architect Award, and exhibited in the 2012 Venice Biennale exhibition. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome Andrew to the stage. Thank you.
Okay, is this working? Perfect. Okay, good afternoon. Thank you, Vivian, for the introduction and the invitation to talk here today. It was about 10 years ago, this was the first teaching position I had moving back from LA, was at U of T. So it's really nice to have the opportunity to come back and present some of the work that we've been doing for a decade. So this afternoon, we wanted to kind of provide some context for the work that we've been doing and a little bit of insight into how the work is developed. We'll do a deep dive into 4 projects and finish with a series of things that are either on the board or kind of about to get published. This is kind of collectively some of the work that we've done over the past 10 years. I think similar to a lot of offices kind of starting out, we had a series of architectural obsessions and kind of preoccupations from which the kind of initial work was generated. I think that being said, we've always been quite conscious from the beginning to try to situate our work within the larger discourse of the discipline. It's always been very important for us to try to be as precise as possible with these pursuits and to kind of clearly locate the office's kind of objectives and identity. So these kind of positions have kind of eventually become the framework by which we strategically approach all of our projects. And the multiplicity kind of allows us to produce a kind of dense layered narrative for the projects, but also allows us the flexibility to kind of locate the project in any number of different ways, which I think has helped us be able to jump scales so radically from 300 square foot coffee shops up to kind of 30,000 square foot market spaces. So I'm going to kind of go through a series of kind of these position preoccupations. So I think we've kind of always felt a certain responsibility starting an office that we kind of engage the city that we're working and living in. I think far too often young practices starting out, it's really easy to get caught up in kind of international competitions instead of kind of investigating things in your own backyard. And so moving to Toronto, we were kind of really inspired by the kind of previous generation's work, some of it up here on the slide, of Myers-Baird and then Myers-Diamond's work, laneway housing, and then kind of Shim and Chung's laneway research done here at U of T, which kind of gave us, I think, a foundation for kind of pursuing some of our low-rise housing ideas. The first time we visited Toronto, so we're maybe some background, or we'll get into the background later. I'm from Thunder Bay, Northern Ontario. My wife's from Leamington area. We didn't grow up here, nor did we work here or go to school here. We kind of just picked up and moved here from Los Angeles to start a practice. So I think a lot of the things in the city that maybe were more commonplace to everybody else were kind of real fascinations to us. And so one of them being the kind of semi-detached housing typology. And so this specific house, for instance, really stimulated our fascination with the typology, and more specifically the placement of the window in the middle of what would be the party wall. And I think for us, this image kind of alludes to the possibility of an internal spatial organization of two units, or a spatial organization that could be separated from the contextual facade, inviting new typological possibilities. Our office has been, or one of our focuses is definitely a kind of material exploration into facades. I think one of the things that we try to do differently is try to overlay a kind of layer of interaction. And so we try to have our facades interact with the public, the neighboring buildings, and try to have them produce a series of effects that are kind of stimulated by movement, seasonal light conditions, weather conditions. It was really interesting. We just did a photo shoot for our Hyde Park residents in the snowstorm last week, which was kind of fascinating, the way this kind of brick texture we have kind of picked up all the snow. I think I missed one. Oh, sorry, that was this one. This is this one. Abstract context. So I think we, from the beginning, have tried to move the discussion of context, which if you're an architect in Toronto doing residential work, you're in it, and you need to take a position, or, well, at least we are trying to take a very clear position with our work. And so we're trying to move the context away from an argument of style and mimicry to one of kind of abstract geometry and material craft. So we're trying to engage in the past, but produce a series of new relationships and kind of overlay a series of new narratives onto the context in our projects. So that was the facades. Landscape. So in a lot of our work, which I think primarily comes from kind of our upbringings in kind of, say, rural Ontario, but also our work in Los Angeles, as we're very much trying to question the role that landscape plays within the kind of residential structure of Toronto. And we're trying to evolve the kind of landscape from a position of kind of picturesque, and one that kind of like bookends a front and backyard typically, to one of kind of synthetic possibilities. Okay, so the work. If you could give me a timer, my thing's not. So the first project we're going to go into is the Semi-Detached House, or sorry, the double duplex. So the site is located in the Parkdale neighborhood of Toronto. This neighborhood's kind of distinguished by its large Victorian houses, Victorian Edwardian houses along tree-lined streets. Originally, there was a single-family house that sat on a double-wide site. So we removed the house, severed the site, and produced two 3,500 square foot duplexes where the division, the 2 stories are 1 unit and 2 lower stories are 1 unit. So the massing for this project kind of emerged from an analysis of the kind of pervasive bay and gable houses seen throughout the neighborhood. So we're kind of trying to look at abstracting that geometry and kind of re-representing certain, I guess, abstract massings within our building. So the vertical screen kind of takes place of the vertical bay windows, the gable side roof here. Actually, another photo kind of matches the exact pitch of the neighbors. On this side, we're using it to pick up a datum line of the neighbor's porch, and then a kind of continuity of a neighborhood brick, or a very similar brick to a lot of the buildings in the neighborhood at the lower level. So one of the things in this, because the context was so rich in a lot of this masonry ornamentation, we felt that it was essential for the project to be able to translate some of that 19th century craft into our project. And so, not this being a development project, we didn't necessarily have the budget for this kind of masonry exploration. We decided to kind of focus on the kind of 2-story wood screened element. And so along with the kind of typical material detailing exploration that kind of would typically go through on an element like this, we wanted to find a way that we could utilize this kind of massive surface area to interact with the community. And in a way, we kind of ended up trying to devise a game. And so that game we finally landed on was cloud watching. So if cloud watching is the projection of meaning onto abstract formations, we kind of reintroduced that into our facade. So by using 2 different kind of horizontal elements, two different degrees placed front and back, we outlined a series of animal profiles within the screen. And so those profiles are giraffe, raccoon, crocodile, panther, and a camel. And right here, you can kind of see the camel lit up in a lighting test at night. And so these were designed such that at certain times of the year and day and weather conditions, you would be able to see kind of portions of these. We were very conscious not to have it be a kind of cartoon. So they're abstract enough that you need to kind of spend some time looking at it. You need to spend some time interacting with the project on a kind of daily basis. So these are some of the kind of fabrication Images, we tried to keep the fabrication as simple as possible. We kind of had 4 different elements. The main one was a kind of steel substructure that had all these little tabs. Like I said, there was 2 different angles of wood, either placed front or back. And then these sections, it was divided up into 3 sections, were fabricated in the living room with 1 skilled laborer and then a lot of kind of other people just helping out on the project, and then lifted and kind of hoisted into place and bolted. So I think there's been a kind of trajectory through some of our first projects that didn't necessarily have large budgets, that we would have to build something like this ourselves. So, and I'll be the first one to say that I'm not an expert craftsman. So we kind of were taking positions that these things kind of needed to go together like a series of IKEA instructions. And so if we could produce that, then we could simplify the construction process, get the bids to go down, or we could easily do it ourselves. So while during the day, the screen is activated by the seasons and sun, at night it kind of glows from inside and becomes, kind of produces a jack-o'-lantern effect. So here's one of the long sections through the project. It's kind of organized. The lower unit is organized around 2 large carved-out courtyards, front and back. The first floor is pulled back on both sides from the facade, producing kind of 2-story glazed windows, which bring a tremendous amount of light kind of into the center of what is a basement, though kind of all this gymnastics, in a way trying to kind of transgress that idea of, or stereotype that people have about kind of basement apartments. The upper floor is organized around a central light well, and then the kind of 2-story screened space. Quickly go through the plan. So here's the kind of entry courtyard at the top, courtyard at the back. These is kind of the first floor is more of a loft type space. Up above, pretty typical kind of dining, kitchen, living organization. And then at the front is the kind of 2-story brise-soleil that kind of provides these types of effects and dappled light on the kind of main dining room of the main living floor, and then up in the bedrooms that look out towards that direction. So materiality in this project was left kind of purposely raw, partly due to necessity. And so one of the things that we did is kind of take the standard 2x blocking for the floor joists and proliferate that through the ceiling, trying to bring some of that texture from outside in. And then here's an image of the courtyards in the back. They were, kind of mural was painted by a local artist, and for us, it kind of acts as a kind of landscape that kind of activates this exterior space and really pulls the kind of interior activities outside and becomes a kind of true extension of that space. So the next project is our Misfit Project. So located in Liberty Village District, downtown Toronto. The project is a 6-story office building, at-grade retail and parking, 4 floors of kind of spec office building, very general, and then a rooftop sculpture garden and event space. So this project kind of started by a kind of search or an ambition of ours to try to produce an office building that didn't have to rely on a glazed curtain wall. There was a series of projects going on right adjacent to our site, and we wanted to find a way of trying to relate more back to the kind of masonry warehouse buildings in Liberty Village. So we started to look at Toronto's precast concrete history as a way of moving forward. And so Toronto has some amazing precast buildings, but have been met with kind of great apprehension. So we tried to find a way and figure out kind of why that was and how we could kind of remedy that. And so if we begin to look at these projects, here the panels are organized in an incredibly rigid manner, producing a very static, solid void that kind of enforces the heaviness and weight of the concrete. Apertures here are always designed within the panels, which makes the kind of part-to-part relationship stagnant and kind of produces a static aggregation. So taking a look at some of the masonry factory buildings and how they produce kind of multiple readings within a monolithic material application, here through the kind of shifting of different coursing techniques. So that's done at kind of window, cornices, projections, which provides a kind of certain visual movement, kind of breaking down the surface and scale within a kind of very stable equilibrium. In contrast to that, we were looking at kind of dry stacked stone and how the kind of lack or kind of lack of the fit between provides a kind of incredible tension and tenuous equilibrium. So here's our iteration of that. So here the panels are designed individually without kind of this would be one of the panels here and one of the here. So panels are designed individually without regard for the neighboring panel or for the overall aggregation. Panels kind of here confront one another, kind of highlighting their glaring differences. Allowing each panel in the overall aggregation to be red. So we started out with designing two panels. One was flipped and became our third panel. These get aggregated across the facade in a very rigid manner, and just with a subtle shift of the panels below, we kind of have a reading of a slightly imperfect reading throughout, which kind of provides a sense of diagonal movement kind of through these zones. So each panel was produced of a kind of 6 pieces, which we used a fabrication technique of flexible, reusable rubber molds that assemble up to produce a larger panel that kind of provides a flexibility of kind of removing any one of those panels out of the mold to produce apertures. And then we've kind of taken that a little bit further as kind of internal research in the office, kind of looking at ways we could obviously combat the sheer heaviness of a scheme like that, and looking at ways of using fiber reinforced concrete. And so this was a small mock-up we did for Design TO last year. So the corner detail for us kind of emphasizes the discontinuity, but also allows for us to kind of highlight the various unique profiles of the panel. So, and also in this image, you can kind of get a sense of the underlying movement throughout the facade, kind of diagonally. The entry we kind of created by pushing back the panels, kind of revealing again this corner detail and the profiles, and then kind of producing an extreme heaviness and weight to that portion, while on the other side, for the cafe, we kind of removed all the panels and kind of floated the solid above. The rooftop sculpture garden, again, is kind of created by kind of pushing in of the panels and kind of oriented towards specific views. How am I doing time-wise? Half hour? Okay, headphone shop. We've had the weird, I guess, privilege of being able to do 2 300 square foot commercial projects. So that, for us in the office, is kind of a niche market that we're trying to carve out. This is the first one that we've done. So it's a headphone retail store located where nobody goes, at the base of this large green tower development on Yonge and Shepherd. And the owner of the store is a passionate audio expert, kind of came to us and asked us if we could kind of design a store that challenges the typical retail experience, that, let's say, focuses more on the efficiency of transaction over client experience. And so one of the things to note about this particular store is that the kind of headphones, these are headphones, and here's a kind of picture of these kind of really interesting amplifiers that come in various sizes. The headphones sell in upwards of $5,000. So because of that and because of the investment, clients spend up to 3 hours in this space kind of testing different types of music with headphones and different kind of pairing combinations between amplifiers and headphones. And so we wanted to kind of create an atmosphere for the store that kind of really celebrated this ritual. And so we did so by producing kind of 2 spatial effects. So the first one was to produce an intimate, dark, kind of tactile atmosphere using kind of smoked oak millwork, smoked oak herringbone floor, blue velvet cushions, and kind of brass accents. The second one, we developed a shelving module that kind of focused the headphone in the elevation view, which is kind of the nicest view, and also allowed us to kind of hide wires behind. And so this unit was then multiplied across the walls and ceiling, which really produced this kind of enveloping, intensive experience and feeling. The panels here, let's see the next one. Here's a kind of general overall. So the panels are kind of arrayed similar throughout, and then the ones that accept the headphones are turned 90 degrees and backlit with recessed LED strips. So there's kind of more of a pyramid type of orientation towards the panels that are actually used for display. So the store is incredibly simple, as you could imagine. Number 4 is building structure. So really the store is an L-shaped piece of millwork that really organizes and houses kind of the majority of storage to kind of clear the space out. The image on the right is a reflective ceiling plan, kind of showing the portions of the ceiling that were kind of shifted and how we kind of have a series of linear LEDs in there, and then the kind of creation of custom panels for the various smoke detectors, fire extinguishers, and diffusers. Here's a kind of close-up view of the storage for the amplifiers and earbuds. So we wanted to find a way of highlighting the kind of precious nature of these things, so we kind of lined the cases in velvet, kind of trying to produce some similarity towards a jewelry store. Here's a kind of image of based on where you are and how you move through the space. There's kind of certain grain to the ceiling that can be viewed, and then at kind of other points it becomes much more chaotic. Okay, triple double. I apologize for the names of the projects. That you do a name when you submit a project that's not complete. You don't want to put the name of the house and the address, and you submit it for a competition. You need a name, and then if it wins, you're literally stuck with it till the end of time. So we've kind of, for this one, carried on that bad trend. So the triple-double was part of a kind of ongoing speculative low-rise housing research that we've been doing. This particular one was part of a larger series that the architecture critic at the Globe and Mail, Alex Bozakovics, did entitled Missing Middle. And so he asked a series of architects to produce a kind of alternative housing models for the underutilized and stagnant residential neighborhoods. And so these are some of the other low-rise research projects we've done. I guess these two are built. These two are kind of self-generated research in the office very early on. But I think all of these kind of focus on a series of or ask the kind of same series of questions. So one would be how to make an architectural argument for density. So how to create an architecture that the quality of density is sought after instead of kind of looked at in a negative fashion. So other was how to create a kind of multiple typologies to cater to a wider variety of owners and renters. So this one over here was kind of created with the idea of aging in place. And then within that, how do you create a kind of series of different economic models that could allow people to, own these places or own and rent or own with kind of multi-generational families. And then the last would be kind of how you develop these projects within the kind of beloved historic Toronto neighborhoods. And how do you add density in a way that doesn't stand out and kind of keeps a certain continuity to those neighborhoods, if that's kind of the big issue with kind of producing some of these projects, is how to deal with the density. So the map on the left is a map showing Toronto's housing stock, predominantly semi-detached, which is 73,000 dwellings. The one on the right is taken from the 2006-16 census and kind of shows a population growth, or I guess in this case, the lack or actually reduction of population growth in certain kind of some of these residential neighborhoods that directly coincide with the ones that have the semi-detached elements to it. So here is the project site. This is the kind of typical semi-detached project along Clinton Street. And this house really represents, I think, a kind of typical condition. So we have a 17-foot 6 wide site by 130 long. Once you put setbacks on that, you have a 14-foot 6 by 55. Typical on top of that is the way that landscape is generally treated as a kind of bookending condition, having relatively no interaction with the building itself. So our proposal here on the right takes two properties, so both halves of the semi, and takes 2 units and turns it into 6. So we reconfigure the sites utilizing the full width of the site and organize the units kind of back to back to back, producing kind of three duplexes. We took the kind of combined space of the front yard and backyard and kind of enclosed that within the building envelope, kind of producing a 4-story courtyard. And so that, when we see the plans, actually almost takes up half of the floor plate, or takes the place of one of those semi-detached houses. So this space for us now begins to participate as a room within the house. And we kind of looked at designing a series of elements we'll go into that kind of look to mediate the weather and kind of extend the usage of this space throughout the year. So here in section, kind of the long section, you can see the back-to-back nature of it. The kind of front one is mirrored to the back. And one of the kind of strategies in dealing with context kind of comes back to this, but also how to do something like this, which kind of picks up on a lot of the kind of datum lines of the neighbors, materiality, kind of scale of windows being reduced by the screens. How to do this and almost produce a Trojan horse for this. And so that's one of the kind of strategies that we've looked at, is how to really provide these kind of connections with the context as a strategy for providing density. So here you enter through the left side courtyard for the main house. And this is all kind of one unit. And then the entry for one of the lower units is right through here. So it still keeps the same kind of division of the facade as far as number of doors. So here's a cut through, or section through the courtyard, but also rendering through that kind of entry courtyard. So here we're kind of looking at ways of kind of being able to actually, utilize this as an extended living room. So we're looking at kind of using exterior fabric on the front courtyard opening, closing that off, also using that on the roof aperture, embedding radiant heating into the slab, also having kind of hidden radiant heaters in the wood slat walls, and then having a kind of large exterior fireplace, which is the kind of hope of the accumulation of those things begins to kind of mediate our weather, and just kind of extending as much as possible the use of this space. So floor plans, this is the first floor. So you can kind of get a sense of just how much of that floor plate is kind of used for this exterior room, and the kind of orientation of the spaces above second floor over here really wrap around this space that brings kind of light light and air into it. The basement unit is really highlighted by the kind of excavated courtyard, entry courtyard on the front and back, but also kind of looking at ways of producing a kind of deep recessed window well, or deep recessed clear story above, in this case, some of the kitchen, to bring as much light as we can into the lower basement unit. This is a view looking from the dining room back out into the courtyard. So again, I think the courtyard itself kind of extends a living space about 500 square feet. So really looking at ways of trying to make those relationships, if not like specific use of space, but at least a kind of visual extension of the interior space. This is kind of looking towards, as you would enter into the courtyard, you kind of enter at the back of it, and then stairs and services are along the party wall separating each unit. And then looking back out from the stair. Okay, so that's for the deep dive. What do we got? Okay, I'll go quick. So I always liked how people showed work that no one's seen yet or isn't on instant, well, it's always on social media, but we kind of just show you a few slides of what we've been working on and what's kind of coming. So this is our High Park residence, which I was talking about we recently shot in that snowstorm last week. This is completed. We're just shooting the interiors that were featured in the Globe and Mail a couple weeks ago. So we're shooting some more of those and going to publish it in the next few months. Milky's Coffee Shop, so this is another 300 square foot project that we're working on that really looks at utilizing this very traditional floor product and kind of really producing a series of kind of untraditional patterns that kind of wrap the ceiling, producing for us a kind of caffeinated space. Similarly, this is Ballet Academy that we just finished up this summer. And so this project was really about focusing on the entry sequence. It's in Bayview Village Mall, which kind of has this very interesting relationship to the ballet studio, but focusing on trying to produce this very dynamic relationship. An entry sequence through the facade with this kind of lenticular image. This is an Oyster Bar that we're designing and actually in fabrication right now for a business out in Vancouver. So it's a 65-foot long table that really tries to mediate between the coziness of and kind of space of a booth seat and then the kind of stand-up bar top. So this one we're fabricating everything here and then shipping it out and assembling it in place in Vancouver. This is a residential project that we just finished up where we're looking to kind of ways of kind of adding to, in this case, a very traditional historical house, and then ways of kind of cutting into it as well, of kind of opening it up. This is another residential project that's going to be shot this summer. And so this is right on the edge of the kind of very high up of the Humber River. So this becomes, for this project, it's about a kind of trajectory, circulation route through the house up into this rooftop patio that looks out towards the Humber River. And then on the outside, we're kind of looking at at a kind of sampling of neighborhood brick coursings and ways of kind of stratifying that on the face of the facade. This is a kind of small residential addition where we started to look at kind of perforated metal as a screen, and in a way trying to kind of invert that process and kind of produce in a way a kind of quasi-brick perf metal screen. This was a large kind of tech office space that we were working on, where there was it was all about kind of entering and having a relationship to the rooftop garden above, and this kind of relationship between actual kind of synthetic and real vegetation. And that's it.
We have time for a few questions, especially from the public, as our class will continue. And we'll have lots of questions then, too. Maybe I'll start us off. Andrew, thank you so much for your lecture. I actually really appreciate the deep dive, as you said, because it gives us more insight into the ways that you're thinking about each of these projects. And I think what's really a common thread among them is that even, I think the work is always kind of flickering between surface and massing or depth, and playing between space and how that something that seems superficial actually starts to kind of bend inwards and become deeper, or articulate its thinness. You kind of do both, I think. And I just was curious how, if you guys have a treasure trove of ideas that you pre-develop before each client that then you kind of bring into the fore, or is it custom to every single project?
I wish we had a treasure trove. I think that gets into our discussion after about how to run an office efficiently. Yeah. We don't, and I think we have approached different projects through different types of material and those material explorations. And so maybe within the brick realm, we've done a lot of kind of looking at brick, but still, I wouldn't say we've been able to kind of cut and paste. I think like something like this project, we're trying to do a shelving unit, right. For a $5,000 headphone. I think one of the difficult parts in our particular office is we're doing such vastly different projects. Right. That except for the residential ones, a kind of translation of that expertise is literally like thrown out the window and you learn something brand new for the next one. So yeah.
Any questions from the audience?
David absolutely has questions.
Thank you very much, Andrew. As always, I'm fascinated by the articulate way in which you work with the performative qualities of materiality, and I don't think it really has to do whether it's commercial or residential, but rather the specifics of what you can do with form and the bounding of space. And though I would love to do another, to use your word, deep dive into that constructive process, there's another aspect of the work in terms of its research, and it has mostly to do with the housing, although I think it does play out the Liberty Village commercial project as well, because it contravenes any of the ridiculous zoning that we are faced with here. I mean, for example, there was a recent interview with Greg Lintern as our chief planner about 6 months ago, in which he claimed, well, you've got 47,000 laneway sites. And Mr. Lintern, how many have been approved? Oh, between 10 and 20, which goes back to whether it's your combination of double, triple, or was it triple, double? I get confused. It does sound like a sports analogy, but, is there a way in which we as a profession can begin to dissolve that boundary between architecture and landscape that you speak about, that aspect of it's not really private space or public space, but shared space? And how might we lobby? How might we suggest that, in fact, there are these alternatives? Because in the end, remarkably, the houses in these radical urban propositions are actually quite traditional and conventional, which surprises me, and yet, in a way, that's the marketplace here. So if you might address that broader urban design or planning agenda and how one gets around that.
That's a lot in there, David.
Yeah, well, that's what friends are for.
A lot. So the landscape one. I think we cannot get out of our heads how nice it was to live in Los Angeles. And I think coming to a city like Toronto, it seems like the public space, the exterior public space, is not valued. And the kind of sheer lunacy of how people curate or cultivate their landscape in the residential projects is kind of fascinating to us. It's bizarre. So I think we're always trying to find a way, if it's not a kind of landscape, though landscape is such a fluid term, it's really kind of developing an interior-exterior spatial relationship, is something we're constantly working on,
Wonderful tradition of a unique kind of courtyard housing.
the caseway houses, yeah.
And so is there, and I would suggest that you're beginning to develop what might be termed a northern climate courtyard, which again is neither public nor private, but perhaps might be the most radical proposition within your housing, proposed housing typology.
Okay. See, I don't know if I would look at it as neither public or private in those spaces. Kind of the distinctions that I like to make are kind of what is within the envelope and out of the envelope, and how those two can oscillate, or I guess the amount of privacy you have. One of the reasons why that two-story Brise Soleil developed is because we wanted to have large exterior windows on the front of a house, and typically every house that has this has large shades to go along with it, and so developing a strategy where you don't have to have shades, where you can actually live with that light coming in, was kind of where it started. Yeah. The planning strategies, that's, I think, a whole other discussion.
Anyway, thank you for the work.
Thank you.
If there are no other questions, oh, there is one. Thank you for coming to the aisle.
Thank you very much that you came. It's always very exciting to have professionals come to school, so thank you. And as a master's student, I was wondering, your firm, I'm aware that you have a couple of young professionals in your firm. I'm just kind of interested in your workflow on how often do you outsource skills for specific inquiries, I guess, for projects, because some of the projects that you're doing are quite intriguing, quite technical sometimes. So I'm just curious on like the workflow of the office. How often do you outsource skills, or how often do you use your students or young professionals to kind of dig into that kind of work?
We don't outsource anything.
No?
If anything, we probably take on more stuff in the office, like specific fabrication and management of construction processes. As far as the people that work in the office, we collaborate in the office very much so. For the first probably 8 years, it was majority of the time it was me and my partner Jody, with kind of one other person in and out. I think we've had the luxury in the last 2 years to really grow the office. We're at 7 in total now. We're obviously at that scale, your role changes as a principal in the office, and really it becomes collaborating with all the other people in the office. So yeah, it's vital. You don't produce work with other people, and definitely you don't produce a lot of work or bigger work, you know? It's kind of essential.
Andrew, thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you.
And for those of you in my